Have you ever considered selling your online business? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen. Thanks for tuning in today. And our guest today is Blake Hutchison. Blake is the CEO of Flippa.com. This is the world's largest marketplace for buying and selling online businesses. So prior to running Flippa, Blake held leadership roles across multiple fast tech growth businesses across E-commerce and SaaS. But his focus now is on helping business owners to exit and helping buyers to acquire lucrative online businesses. So today we're going to talk about how to do that. How do you value your online business? Is your online business actually worth anything to someone? When is the right time to sell, and who buys online businesses? So I'm really excited to have Blake here. Blake, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks so much for the warm introduction.
My pleasure. And I'm very interested in this topic because, we know bricks and mortar businesses, how that gets valued. But when you're talking about blogs and podcasts and I don't know, YouTube channels that have turned into businesses. I'm really interested, and I think there's a lot of people that will also be very interested in this as well. So let's first of all talk about the kinds of businesses that get sold, online businesses that get sold on your platform.
Yeah, so essentially anything that has a URL and a revenue stream, so therefore digital by nature, can get sold as a digital asset or an online business in the context of Flippa. So what we're most interested in and where we see most of our business owners have success is where the business has been running for multiple years and the business is revenue generating, typically cash flow positive, and more often than not is either one of the following four types. So either e-commerce, a content asset, so that could be a content website, it could be a podcast, it could be a YouTube channel, but something which is growing on the basis of it producing content. SaaS, so that's software as a service, and then finally apps. So typically the iOS and Android ecosystem. So they're all the apps that sit on top of your iPhone that you play with and engage with each day. They all have some material value in an asset marketplace like Flippa. And so what those business owners are essentially looking to achieve with Flippa is what we might call the exit. And the exit is obviously that opportunity to realize value, to take money in exchange for selling your asset to someone who has an equal amount of passion in it as you have done for the prior X number of years.
Well, I think that's a really good point. What you just talked about there is, let's say, for example, somebody is developing content. Let's take, for example, Leaders of Transformation, right? My podcast. So I have a website, I have a podcast, I have a coaching and training business that's attached to that as well. There's revenue coming in and all that, and so you take that and you say, okay, if I was to sell that to someone, it would change the dynamic, potentially could change the dynamic, could be better.
Yes.
But it just changes it because I've been the face of Leaders of Transformation for so long. So how does that work? Not that I'm planning on selling anytime soon, just FYI.
No, that's a really good example. And it's also a slightly nuanced example, because one thing I will admit straight off the bat is where a founder, CEO or spokesperson is inextricably connected to the value, i.e. that's the one and only thing that your customer base is buying into, that can become a more difficult sell. So let's paint a picture and provide a couple of different examples. So example number one would be where the individual is attached to the brand, but not inextricably attached to the value being produced or created. So crochetkim.com. So Kim Guzman is the founder of that business. It is a blog about crochet. It's been operating for 20 years, 2 decades. But critically, she has a community that is providing crochet patterns, instruction, advice, and a forum where they're engaging with each other. So it's actually the community which is producing the value, i.e. the content. And then the ad revenue that I derive from that content production is therefore a function of the quality of the community. So yes, Kim is attached to the business. Yes, everyone knows that Kim is attached to the business, but the value being created and the revenue derived is not a function of her effort. It's a function of others. In that case, very easy sell. In fact, certainly not an overly high-priced asset, but sold for $90,000 within 48 hours of being listed on the platform. Now let's take another example. So another example is you can have a very prolific, very successful coach. So maybe they're teaching how to grow e-commerce businesses. Maybe they're teaching how to build a podcast, how to scale a podcast. But every video I watch has that individual's face. Every video I watch, they say, "Welcome to the Blake Hutchison show." That's going to be a tough sell because the value is most likely inextricably attached to that personal brand. And so what the buyer is going to most likely have to do is either rebrand and repurpose that content, which is certainly doable, or convince Blake Hutchison to stay on board and be a party to that business's growth while the actual shareholding and share structure may have changed. That's a more difficult sell.
So yeah, and thank you for clarifying that, because that is exactly why I know there's a lot of people that want to brand their company name themselves. And that's probably not something that they're going to sell. So I have NicoleJansen.com. I'm not going to sell that because that's my name. Sure. Even though I just got married and it's like, oh, okay, well, complicates a little bit. But anyway, so that I'm not going to sell. But one of the things that I've always believed in is if I'm going to build a company, I'm doing it under a name that I could sell. So Leaders of Transformation, if I were to pass on the torch to someone else, and it's not contingent, the value that you're talking about is not necessarily me. I bring value, certainly, but it's my guests. It's the additional things that the website offers, intellectual property, that and in value content, whatever, let's say a blog that is somebody else is writing guest articles and blogs about and so forth. Now you're talking about, now it becomes more valuable.
That's exactly right. And think about it as a game show host. So I don't know who the current host is of Wheel of Fortune, but there have been multiple hosts of Wheel of Fortune over multiple decades, right? And so Wheel of Fortune still has a fan base and a community that lives and breathes around it. And this is the same with something like a non-branded, non-personal branded asset, where yes, the host is absolutely inextricably connected to how people perceive it and its success, but there is a transition that can likely happen.
So this ties into a question I had later on, but we can talk about it now, is how do you set your business up for sale? Knowing this, what we're talking about here, how do you set it up in advance? We're talking about extracting yourself from the value proposition of the business. Yes. Maybe adding on some things that you can add on. So let's take some examples, of that, where they've actually prepared for that exit down the road.
Yes. That's a really great question and arguably the most important point. So if you have business owners listening to this talk now, what I want them to do is visualize and envisage a time when they will exit. And that might be 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever it might be. And I want them to think about the growth rate in their business and imagine that growth rate continues at approximately the same rate, and get some sense of how their business will be performing at that point. where they imagine they might want to exit. Now, some people say, well, I'll never want to exit. But the reality is most small businesses have a lifetime of about 6 years, right? So once they're up and going, the lifetime of an online business or any small business is approximately 6 years. And Intuit with their QuickBooks Online product and Xero with their cloud accounting product will tell you that. And so what I want people to do is start to imagine getting to that point in time, and then imagine what their business might be worth. Just for argument's sake, we see businesses valued between 2 and, this is a big range, but just for people's benefit, between 2 and 10 times net profit would be the likely exit scenario for a small business seller. So think about that. So that means if you're doing $100,000 net today, you might be worth anywhere between $200,000 and $1 million. And again, I know that's a very big range, but there's so many different variables here. So what that means is you need to now start preparing for all of the things a buyer is going to expect of you above and beyond understanding what your business is valued at. So they're going to expect standard operating procedures documented. They're going to expect that your financials are in order. So if you're not reconciling your expenses and categorizing those, you should start to do that. Or pay a bookkeeper to do it. Or get cloud accounting, and it can help you do that almost programmatically these days. If you think that there might be a time one day in the distant future where you would like to sell, you would also want to think about what reliance you have on certain revenue sources. And is there an opportunity to diversify that just a little bit in the event that something slows down? In the event that a buyer says, well, what are the other opportunities here? You can say, well, look, I've got some green shoots where I have investigated other revenue channels and some things have started to work for me. Or by the way, I've tested these 3 things and they haven't worked, right? So you want to have some sense of what the blueprint is for a prospective buyer. So when they say, okay, I like it, thank you. Let's see if it's all in order. I've got those SOPs, I've got clean financials, and I've got to have some sense of what my revenue diversification would look like. So there are a couple of points. Now, some examples of that. We have, business owners across different business models. So let's just give one from e-com and one from SaaS. So we had a SaaS business owner that we met literally 3 years ago. And he has always said to us, once I get to $1 million ARR, I'll be ready to sell. And we have said, okay, we understand. No problem. We're here waiting in the wings for when you are ready. And each year he's checked in with us and he said, can I see how valuations have changed for my type of business? Still not ready to sell because I said $1 million. But have valuations changed? Is the buyer universe more hungry now or less hungry now? And as a function of that, we've been able to say to him, yes, this is what buyers are looking for in these assets. Perhaps tailor some of your efforts this particular way. Yes, buyers are responding more favorably to businesses which have less dependency on Facebook ads these days. So you should perhaps think about how you can acquire your customers in a more efficient manner that is less dependent on Facebook, just as an example. So that would be his example of preparing and setting up a pathway to exit. And that pathway is going to be different for different people. We had a buyer who bought an asset on our site for $7,500. He sold it 2.5 years later for $550,000, right? That's a very, very substantial return. And when he bought it, it was very clear to us and to him that he was now going to run it for a 2.5 to 3 year period before he exited it again. And so he's what you call an acquisition entrepreneur. He buys, he runs, operates more efficiently than it has been in the past, and then again, ultimately exits. And so in his case, it was like, okay, I've got some good bones. What are the areas of the business where I have a specific core competency where I can lend a helping hand and move this thing along? And so his pathway was, what are my skills? And what am I going to apply to this business to make it better so that when it's ready to sell, these are the areas of the business that are in fantastic shape, while admitting that there are areas where he doesn't have the skills that are in less good shape. And so the pathway is a little bit different for each person, but often it comes down to what you want to achieve. So how much you would like to exit for, and then planning a pathway to get there along a particular time period.
So this brings up a little bit more about what you do on the platform. So this isn't just a platform marketplace where somebody uploads their business and, like you mentioned Facebook Marketplace. Okay, poor example, but I mean, there's lots of platforms out there. But let's say it's just like I upload this, I make this post and I say, hey, I have this business for sale. And somebody comes along and says, oh, I'd like to have that business. And you have all these, different details there and so forth. So tell us a little bit more about what you actually do. You kind of alluded to it there, that you're much more involved with these sellers and buyers than,
Yeah, so we're a
just
little
having
bit
it
like,
post on it.
yeah, thank you for the question. I think that for the average American, think about it a little bit like a Zillow, right? Not exactly, but a little bit like a Zillow. So we're a combination of advisory and tech to help a sale along. And so the tech part of that is interesting. So if you are a business that operates using Shopify, we ask you to connect your Shopify data. So you log into your Shopify account. Flippa will then pull down the data with your permission, of course, and we'll expose that data to our buyers based on what we know buyers look for. So that technology capability gives us the ability to help a seller better present the marketing materials that are necessary to sell your business. But we also help the buyer to understand and trust transparently how that business is actually doing. So that's kind of piece one. Piece two is we have the world's largest buyer universe. So we have around 1,000 buyers join each day. And so we need to understand those buyers. And so what we've invested very heavily in is basically a matching engine. And people find this funny when I say it, but think about it as Tinder for buying a business, right? So our job is to try to marry up the business owner with the most relevant buyer or relevant buyers, because you actually want to drive some competition to get the business owner the best possible price. So we will then match, and that happens programmatically. So when you list on our platform, buyers just start flooding in and people are like, whoa, look at all these buyers. And so our job is to try and organize those buyers for you. Then the third thing we do is we have architected what we call the deal room. And the deal room is where you can do, all the things you would do on most marketplaces like an eBay or an Airbnb, but you can go back and forth, you can chat, you can schedule calls, you can submit a letter of intent, you can start the escrow process, you can conduct due diligence, you can attach files, you can even invite your bookkeeper or accountant or lawyer into the platform and use them to bounce the negotiation off with while you're dealing with multiple buyers. So it's a network in that regard. And then that's the tech, right? So then the last bit of that is the advisory. So if you're selling anything on our platform over $100,000, and we certainly see a lot of things under that as well, but if you're selling anything on our platform over $100,000, then we will have a dedicated advisor just for you. They're a business broker, basically. So they're operating on top of our platform, ensuring that you don't have to do the heavy lifting. We'll do the heavy lifting for you. And so we combine our tech with our capability to ensure that deals happen efficiently and in the right way, and that both parties get what they want out of that transaction.
So how did you get into this yourself?
I sold my own business on Flippa. So I'm not the founder. Let's get that out there, because a lot of people think that I am. So I want to clear that up. I think founders are incredible. And that's, they build these incredible platforms with great ideas. And that wasn't me. So I'm the CEO, I run the business, but I have actually sold my own business on Flippa. So I empathized with the customer journey, which is that we've all built something that we're passionate about. We all put our blood, sweat, and tears into it. In many cases, we did well. In some cases, we did less well. But ultimately, these things have value. And I believed there needed to be a platform and a marketplace which supported that. And I found one. And so I exited my own marketplace. It was a marketplace for specialty food. Producers and providers could upload like a shop front, like an Etsy-like shop front for specialty foods. So a chocolate maker, a butcher, a cheesemonger, etc. Upload their own shop front, and then people could buy from them directly. Unfortunately, I was way too early. I did this back in 2010, and logistics was really tough, and sending chocolate on a very hot day in Australia is pretty illogical. So that concept didn't work, but we built a big community. We had a couple of 100,000 people using the platform. We had multiple providers. And so I was able to list that on Flippa and go through that experience. As a function of that, plus working for travel tech and cloud accounting, all those types of things, I genuinely empathize with small businesses. And so in travel, how that relates is most hotel GMs and hotel owners are for the most part, small businesses. And certainly cloud accounting was oriented to small businesses. And that's what we do here at Flippa. We spend all of our waking hours with small business owners. And I love that. So I love what I do.
Well, I think that platform that you had made me think about the idea of being on the bleeding edge. Sometimes you have that idea and you're so ahead of it, cutting edge, and then there's bleeding edge. And so, I think of my husband. My husband loves gourmet food, so he would have been all about that. So,
Yeah, like that.
yeah. So this is great, Blake. And I think that, this show is about helping people to transform the way they see themselves, others, in the world around them, and to see possibilities, to kind of go beyond what they know is possible, what they know is available and out there. And so what you're doing here is, I'm sure there's people who thought, oh, could I sell my business? I don't even know what kind of business to sell. So we've addressed that. And that has been awesome. I think there's probably some curiosity, and even in me, some curiosity about the question that gentleman asked you and said, so what are people hungry for right now? Like, what are some of the most popular businesses that people are selling right now, and or more importantly, looking to buy right now in this time? And has that changed since, COVID, it was a huge shift in business. So, has it changed? Has it changed? Is it changing? What can people expect for the next few years?
It's definitely changed. So, during the heady days of the pandemic, when we're all locked at home and furiously buying online, e-commerce, which is definitely not going away, got itself to an inflated level very quickly. And as a function of that, you had a lot of frothy buyers snapping up e-commerce businesses. And that demand for e-commerce businesses, while it's still there, isn't as aggressive. And so the multiples that I might get for my Shopify business, or my Fulfilled by Amazon business, or my BigCommerce business, or my WooCommerce business, or anything operating on top of an e-commerce platform, might not be as good right now as it has been. On the flip side, buyers are pretty savvy. They're a sophisticated bunch, so they kind of just move their money around. And there's a lot of people who their entire livelihood is built around buying and selling. And so what that means is that they've moved their interest set, or others have evolved in their place. And so we see a lot of interest right now for content assets, where people are saying, well, I want to own a community, because once you own a community, it tends to be that unless you neglect that community stays true to you. And that's really, really important. So people are paying a premium for content assets right now, literally blogs about anything. So long as they've got a strong, stable operating history, so long as they are not paying for their traffic and getting it predominantly organically, so Google, and so long as it's making money, and they can imagine that particular category isn't a fad, and is more likely to be with us for a very long time. So, for example, if you have a blog that is all about dogs, and you refer traffic to Amazon, and you make affiliate revenue by selling dog beds, or dog food, or dog accessories, that's not going anywhere. So long as you continue to upkeep that content, that type of asset is much loved, and there's demand for that. Similarly, apps, right? So people appreciate that people will be spending more and more times on their phone. And if you can actually prove that a particular app has very, very strong daily active usage, then that app is hugely lucrative. And that app could be generating money through subscription, through a one-time download fee or in-app advertising. And so apps right now are hugely viable and also very attractive to buyers. So that was a very long-winded answer to the question of, yes, it is shifting, but it kind of always shifts. And it shifts based on what buyers think is the next least speculative asset. So these are not speculative assets. They're not NFTs. They're not crypto. It's not a tech stock. It's a good quality, viable online business. And that's the same as saying it's a good quality, viable small business.
So you mentioned crypto and NFTs because there's a lot of talk, or was a lot of talk. I don't hear about it as quite as much recently. Maybe that's just because I'm not paying attention to it. Maybe it's not in my algorithms, but I mean, it's out there, certainly. Talk about why that's not a good, viable online business.
Yeah, and I think the really short answer to that is it's exceptionally turbulent. And so for the average buyer who is not a seasoned investor, you are dealing with something where you have to know and expect that your $10,000 investment could go wildly south or wildly north.
Yeah.
And the speculation around that should make the average person, I'm not saying it's not a good investment for someone who is extraordinarily studious and understanding of this space, but for the average investor, the swings and roundabouts of that asset class should make you a little bit nervous. You only just have to look at the charts to feel a bit nervous. Whereas, let me put it to you this way. If my small business or online business, and frankly, yes, we only do digital and online businesses, but it is the same for a laundromat. If a business is doing $100,000 net and did that last year and did near that the year prior and did near that the year prior, bet your bottom dollar that in 2023, it will do near that again.
Yeah.
So these are not overvalued speculative assets. They are underappreciated, good quality businesses. And so you're not likely to pay overs at this time. It's a very fast growing buyer network. So I think one day valuations will creep up to levels which we might all say are a little bit silly. But at this stage, it's still a mostly underappreciated, undervalued asset class. And so if you think about getting yield on an investment property, maybe I can buy a property in, I don't know, Austin, Texas. Maybe I can put that on the rental market, and maybe, and I must admit, I don't actually know the answer to this, but maybe I can get 4 to 6% rental yield. Okay. So I don't know how much that apartment's going to cost me. Let's say it's going to cost me $500,000. Well, in the online space, I might be able to buy a $100,000 asset. It's making $50,000 net. Next year, it makes $50,000 net. Well, that's a 50% return on my investment. I don't know another asset class which predictably gives you a 50%. And clearly I made those numbers up, but we are seeing between 30 to 50% annualized return on investment. So that doesn't mean it's suddenly a get rich quick scheme. And I'm not telling everyone to suddenly run out and do it, because clearly you need to know what you're doing. But the reality is these assets have been doing this. The average asset that sells on Flippa is 4.5 years old. So there is a history of it doing what it says it does.
That's good. Blake, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This has been fascinating to me, and I'm sure our listeners, a lot of small businesses, a lot of people with online businesses. I'm sure that it's been valuable to them as well. So your website, flippa.com, you also have additional content? You were kind of mentioning about the advisory side of your business. They can take advantage of that as well, or because you mentioned about having a business that's $100,000 or more, but for those ones that are trying to prepare themselves, or do you have other resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, a couple of quick tips. I mean, if you just want to know what a business is worth and or want to see what's selling, there's no fees for people to browse around our website. So I hate to say it, but use it as an opportunity to snoop on other people's businesses, right? Because you can literally read a listing and you can get a sense of, oh, well, this is pretty interesting. This business owner out of Philadelphia sells candles, and they've been selling candles online for 3 years. And so you can get a sense of what is a good idea and what a business that performs well might be worth. So that's informative, and a lot of people actually do that. We have a lot of business school students who sit on our platform learning about business models. So we encourage people to do that. Second thing you can do is, if you do have a business and you want it valued, there's it's free, and it will give you an indicative valuation. So you just go to flippa.com, you get a free valuation. It's 5 or 10 minutes to step through some questions. And I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but it will give you an indicative view based on a long history of us doing this as to what your business is worth. And that's a good way to start as well. The blog is helpful. It will give you sort of, where to start, how to start thinking about selling, how to start thinking about buying. So there's some nice content there. But I tend to personally find that just browsing around the listings is a good learning experience.
Now you're in Australia, but this is all around the world.
Yeah, it was founded out of Australia, but our core market is North America, and our biggest team is in Austin, Texas.
Got it. Blake, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I again, like I said, I find it fascinating. What a great, even like you mentioned just now, an education tool to really understand. Go there, look at businesses. If you've ever wondered, I think about, I always say leaders of transformation take action. I think about our listeners and our viewers and saying like, hey, you know what? If you've ever wanted to learn about business and what a viable business looks like versus a maybe not so viable, you may not find too many of those on the platform, but these viable businesses and what buyers might be looking for, go check it out. I actually have a client of mine who has a bricks and mortar business that is looking to sell it. And so it's like all the standard operating procedures are up here, right? And, and they've got it dialed in, but it's got to be documented. It's got to be something that somebody else can take on. You mentioned about the bank accounts, like the financials have to be clean. It can't be your private checking account. It has to be set up separately, all those, obvious things. And yet if you're a small business owner, you might not know that. So go learn about this stuff so that you can prepare your business if you ever want to sell. And the truth is that at some point, you're not going to do what you have been doing. You're not going to do it anymore for whatever reason. And maybe your kids don't want to take it on, or somebody, in your family doesn't want to take it on, or you're done with it. And so this is a great opportunity to be able to take what you've built, prepare it in advance so that you have an asset, that all that time and energy that you spent, that maybe that business afforded you an income for many, many years. But now you can also at the same time simultaneously build an asset which you can turn around and sell. And that idea, that concept that you have, that you have, this legacy that you have built can continue on long past, your personal lifetime. And so I encourage our listeners and viewers to take advantage of that. Blake has been generously, offering input here. There's so much on the website. So go to flippa.com and find out more about that. And we love to hear your stories. We love to hear, how this has resonated with you. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. You can reach out to us there. Of course, you can find us on social. We'd love to hear your stories, and if you have questions about it, reach out to us. We'd be happy to pass those on and support you if that is something that you're looking to do going forward. So we appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in. And again, Blake, thank you for being here. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.